Emerging market stocks headed south today. We saw MSCI's index of developing world stocks falling about 0.2% on the day. It was hurt by weakness among shares in South Korea and certainly index heavyweight China as well. Now on the continent, South Africa's JSE pretty stagnant today. Rand weakness did benefit some miners and Rand hedge stocks. We also saw retail bank Capitec was up about 1.8% on the day, reporting that headline earnings per share rose about 19% in the year to end February. Now, also coming up on the show today, relief for cash-strapped consumers as South Africa's Reserve Bank leaves interest rates unchanged. Kenya woos Ugandan importers with a dry port facility to ease haulage costs. And Boeing unveils a software update for its 737 MAX jets after 2 deadly crashes in less than 5 months. Well, let's begin the show in South Africa, where the country's Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee has kept interest rates unchanged, in line with expectations of many analysts. Interest rates remain at 6.75%. The committee also kept the rates unchanged due to a weak economy and lower inflation. Now, inflation is expected to moderate this year, but the bank has made it clear it will prefer inflation anchored at the midpoint of the 3% to 6% target range. Now, back in February, inflation was below the midpoint of the range at 4.1%. Growth forecasts, meanwhile, were revised down for the next 3 years on the global slowdown, declines in business confidence, power cuts, as well as growing pressure on household disposable income.
MPC assesses the risks to the growth forecast to continue to be on the downside. Electricity supply constraints and weak business confidence will likely limit near-term production and investment prospects. The committee remains of the view that current challenges facing the economy are primarily structural in nature. Given current economic vulnerabilities, prudent macroeconomic policies combined with structural reforms that raise potential growth and lower the cost structure of the economy have become even more urgent.
Well, let's delve further into this decision and, of course, what other African central banks have been discussing this week. We're joined by economist Chris Hart in Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hart. Now, we certainly expected to see the Reserve Bank keep rates stable at their current levels, given the slowing economy and, of course, rising prices in electricity. What are your thoughts on today's decision? And was there any scope for a cut or hike in rates right now?
Yeah, I think the central bank their hands are largely tied. They're already facing a weak economy, but there are cost-push inflationary pressures that are in the economy, but the weak demand in the economy has helped to keep inflation reasonably subdued. But when the central bank says we need to anchor the inflation rate in the midpoint of the target range, what's been happening is it's been fluctuating with the midpoint of the actual trend in inflation, more at the upper end of in other words, in the upper half of the actual inflation target band. It's not really fluctuating through the full. In other words, we're not getting to the bottom of the inflation target band. 4 is the low and 6 is the upper, and that's where more or less where we're fluctuating, around 5%, if you like, and it does need to come down to that 4% mark as the actual midpoint for the central bank to be happy. If we didn't have the constraint on growth, we probably would have, the central bank probably would have gone to a hike. In other words, they are theoretically on a hiking cycle at the moment, but really it's the weakness of the economy that ties their hands.
And certainly some analysts say that we could see more hawkish MPC decisions going into the rest of the year. But let's talk about ratings group Moody's. It is expected to deliver its review tomorrow, which could have huge implications on South Africa's economy. What do you expect to hear from them, Mr. Hart, and how does that factor into your outlook for South Africa's economy?
Well, it's in a sense the central bank decision may well have been informed also by the rating agency. The weak growth is what's keeping interest rates more constrained, but weak growth is also the reason why we're likely to see a change in the outlook from stable to negative. In other words, Moody's probably will start to move to actually cut its rating. It's the last rating agency that still is investment grade and has got a stable outlook. The Moody's has been very kind to South Africa at the moment, or in the past several decisions, in the sense that they are looking for the upward and recovery in the economy. The trouble is, in the last several years, that recovery simply hasn't come, and I think the central bank alluded to it. There's an urgency for reforms, all right, to actually make it easier to do business and cut the cost of doing business in South Africa. But with elections on, I don't think that's going to happen. I think everybody's in election mode. It's quite populist at the moment, which the populist take is really to raise costs, raise taxes, raise regulations, and South Africa is already overtaxed and overregulated, and that is not going to improve anytime soon. So really the president, in trying to promote South Africa, is more on a PR spin campaign rather than actual real reforms that's needed at the cutting edge to get the economy going.
Right. Now, on a wider picture, we know central bankers across Africa, in Nigeria, Kenya, in now South Africa, they all announced their rate decisions this week. Now, as expected, they all kept their policy rates unchanged, save, of course, Nigeria. It did surprise us with a cut of about 0.5%. What are your thoughts on these decisions and certainly the direction central bankers in Africa are going this year?
Yeah, I think with the exception of South Africa, which is mainly, South Africa's problems are mainly domestic. In a sense, Nigeria faces the same thing. They've got a lot of domestic problems in terms of the ease and difficulty of doing business. Nigeria notoriously sits at the lower end of the global competitiveness and ease of doing business tables. But with the oil price that has risen over the past few years, I think, or certainly over the past year, it has helped the Nigerian economy to put a little bit of more energy in that economy, and it also helped to stabilize its exchange rate. So the Nigerian central bank, I think, has got a little bit more flexibility. It was a surprise. I think interest rates there may well be too low given the level of inflation. But at least at this stage, I think Nigeria is looking for a recovery in the economy, and at least a sustained recovery in the economy over the next year or so. Kenya is also looking a little bit more healthy, but I think the external conditions in the global economy do cast a bit of a cloud on the African economy, and we're talking about the African continent in general, because it's slowing down. Europe really hasn't really got going since the global financial crisis. And then the rate hikes in the US has also started to see a constraint in the US growth. And China's also struggling again. The US trade, China's, the spat between China and the US in trade has subdued, I think, the Chinese economy. And that also is filtering back into emerging markets. So you are seeing a bit of pressure on commodity markets in general. But in the case of energy and oil, it has been reasonably buoyant, and that from a Nigerian perspective is good. From a Kenyan perspective, it's not good because they are oil importers. But I think the Kenyan economy has actually been on a good footing and been able to sustain quite good levels of growth for the past few years.
Right. Well, as always, great to have your insights, Mr. Hart. Of course, that was economist Chris Hart joining us in Johannesburg. Well, let's shift focus now to Sudan. The central bank there has indefinitely suspended use of a mechanism for setting the daily exchange rate of the Sudanese pound against the dollar. Now, this allowed for a sharp devaluation of the local currency, and that's as part of a package of measures designed to tackle its economic crisis. Back in October, the Reserve Bank announced the mechanism for setting the exchange rate on a daily basis through a new body of bankers and exchange bureaus. Now, the country's economy has been in crisis since 2011 after the South seceded, depriving it of a crucial source of foreign currency. Meanwhile, ride-hailing service Uber has bought out Careem, its main competitor in the Middle East, in a deal worth about $3.1 billion. This, of course, leaves Uber as the only car-hailing firm in the region. Now, prior to the deal, the Egyptian government had warned Uber that if it goes ahead with the takeover, then it will be in breach of the anti-monopoly laws and will be penalized for monopolizing the market. Here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The $3.1 billion deal has taken the startup scene in the Middle East by storm.
As a business, this is a very good indicator. For a startup in the Middle East that's only 7 years old to be sold for such a huge amount, $3.1 billion. It follows Amazon that bought Souk.com for about $800 million. It's good for the Middle East startup market.
Careem operates in 23 countries in Northern Africa, the Middle East and Asia. And his drivers are a bit anxious about the future, though they were told by management there will be no changes yet.
I hope it will be for the good. This shows that Uber is a successful company that is growing, and by buying Careem, I hope they can provide better incentives and packages for us.
The Uber takeover, however, has not been welcomed by the anti-monopoly and the competition protection authorities in Cairo.
The same situation happened in Singapore lately when Uber bought rival Grab. It monopolized the market and raised prices a lot afterwards. There's an ongoing court case with the Singapore government now. Authorities fear the same here because the clients and drivers can both suffer and will not find an alternative company for Uber to work with.
Authorities in Cairo are still studying the effects of the merger. But even if Uber is penalized, the harshest penalty that is available by law is a maximum fine of $29 million. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And now a look at some of our corporate headlines today. South African retail giant Steinhoff has sold its 75% stake in South African auto dealership unit Unitrans. Now, this comes days after selling its 26% stake in Cap Industrial Group to shore up its finances, and that's following the unearthing of a $7.3 billion fraud. Now, the company has been scrambling for working capital to pay off its debt and bolster its finances. Meanwhile, Kenyan state-owned Geothermal Development Corporation says its net earnings jumped from about $2.3 million to $13.9 million in 2018. The company's revenues grew by 24% to hit $35.7 million due to the growing demand for steam power. Now, despite the high revenues earned, the exploration company is still struggling under tax penalties of close to $11 million and high current liabilities, which stand at about $101 million. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's oil company, Saudi Aramco, has announced plans to buy a 70% stake in a state-controlled petrochemical giant for about $69.1 billion. This will help to finance an ambitious campaign to modernize the kingdom after the much-delayed initial public offering. Now, the remaining 30% of the Saudi Basic Industries Corporation will continue to be listed on Saudi Arabia's Tadawul Stock Exchange. And Iceland's WOW Air says it is ceasing operations and cancelling all its flights after efforts to raise more funds failed. The company flew a total of 3.5 million passengers in 2018 as it focuses on low-cost travel across the Atlantic. Well, many fear the collapse could trigger a 16% drop in tourists this year as a knock-on effect. And that's a look at our corporate headlines today. Well, we're heading into a short break now, still to come on the show. Kenya woos Ugandan importers with a dry port facility to ease haulage costs. And Ghana introduces speed limits on public transport vehicles to curb accidents.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now, Kenya has offered its neighbor Uganda a parcel of land to establish a dry port. The decision was reached to attract more business and ease of cost of moving cargo from the port of Mombasa. Now, the dry port will be established in Naivasha, just outside the capital, Nairobi. The move is part of a push by the two states for a joint standard gauge railway project. It's also part of Kenya's commitment to keep Uganda as its biggest client for its transit cargo. Now, of course, Uganda is the biggest market to Kenya's port of Mombasa. Now, the two East African nations are determined to ease movement of goods in a bid to bolster trade and enhance regional integration in the region.
Also confirmed to President Museveni that by the end of this year, with that development in Naivasha, and then moving on to the meter gauge from there to Malaba, that goods will now move from Mombasa to Malaba within 2 days.
Already some work has been done. A lot of work was done. As you told me yourself, you told me about Naivasha, the land where Uganda can build a dry port, because the railway is about to get to Naivasha. Now, when the goods move by train from Mombasa to Uganda, they shed off 60% of the cost in terms of transport.
Well, let's discuss that standard gauge railway plan further. We're joined by David Owiro. He's an independent economic analyst. Great to have you on the show, David. Now, talking about that SGR deal, last year, it was actually put on ice. It seemed like the two countries were struggling to find common ground on that Malaba to Kampala line. What are your thoughts on what transpired then and what changed the direction of the deal?
Thank you. I think, as it was known, the SGR was to be funded by China through the China Exim Bank. And for Kenya's part, the bit connecting from Naivasha all the way to Kisumu, then on to Malaba, only the assurance we had was that Kenya had finances to, or had secured funding to only put up from Naivasha all the way to Kisumu. And so there was a bit of it that was missing. And so Uganda, on the other hand, could not get the funding or assurance without Kenya having to complete that section from Malaba to Kisumu. And so now that that is in place, I think that is what has turned around now Uganda's interest and the commitment that now we are hearing today.
Now, talking about how it's going to benefit Uganda, this new SGR line from Malaba to Kampala. Some say it could be a game changer in terms of reducing transportation costs, but some also say it might do little service for Uganda, which is pretty much an import-reliant country. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is actually going to be quite a positive thing for Uganda. We know Uganda is the largest trading partner for Kenya. And so a lot of its goods have to go through either Kenya or Tanzania. We know currently that on the old line, it takes about 21 days for goods to be transported from Kenya all the way to Uganda. And so once this is in place, they're talking about reducing it down to 2 days. And so what we know even now, if the Kisumu line is completed, it will come down all the way to 5 days. And so there's a lot to be gained from this. On the other hand, of course, the critics are that, the criticism is that there's still a lot of costs for the SGR because there are questions around its viability, and what the examples they're giving is that if you compare the Nairobi to Mombasa line, transportation costs have almost increased by half. And so, of course, once we have Uganda on board, this will also go towards the bottom line of obviously improving the viability of the project, and these costs will likely go down. And what we have to bear in mind is that the costs for the SGR have almost been front-loaded because the support that we got from China is being paid currently. And so once that payment, of course, is through, now the earnings will almost just go directly to Kenya Railways and Uganda Railways rather than going back to contribute to the repayments that are happening for the loan.
Right. And just shifting focus slightly, what does this all mean for relations between the East African community and certainly projects or programs like the single customs territory? As we know, Museveni is on ground in Kenya. He's talking with Uhuru Kenyatta. How does that make you feel about relations going forward and some of the things that need to be resolved?
It's a very positive move and, of course, very progressive. We know that we have a customs union with a single, of course, a common external tariff. What has remained is the full implementation of the single customs territory. One of the things that have stood in the way of that is, of course, having convergence on some of the practicalities of operating a single customs territory. And these are to do with having a common receipting system, which with that comes with the aspects of IT, appropriate IT, so that all the revenue authorities can, for instance, log in and see from a customs entry point of view who has gotten what and so forth. But also in terms of sharing the revenues that come into the customs territory, because ultimately it is envisaged that goods will be imported into one point and then revenues collected at that point, and these revenues are meant to be shared via the respective customs revenue authorities. And so these are some of the challenges that, of course, have stood in the way of implementing a full single customs territory. And with, of course, having a dry port for Uganda, as has been suggested, will go a long way in sort of addressing those challenges. I think from a broader point of view, this is something that enhances the coherence in terms of industrial policy and strategy. It would have been, an economic loss for Kenya to do an SGR all the way to the border, and then for Uganda not to, of course, extend on their side. And so this, if you have one railway, and of course if these are the key transit routes that are being developed, it goes towards addressing Africa's infrastructure problem, which is essentially about connectivity and of course now enhancing our industrialization.
Right, so it's a positive step forward for the East African community. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but many thanks for joining us in the studio. Of course, that was Mr. David Owiro. He's an independent economic analyst. Well, let's shift our focus now to Ghana, where commercial bus drivers in the country are calling on the government to revamp the country's major road networks. This comes in the wake of last Friday's deadly bus collisions in the country's Bono East region. Meanwhile, Ghanaian authorities are set to enforce new speed limit laws to curb accidents later this year. Well, CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai gives us the details.
Francis Amo drives 8 hours from Accra to the Bono region 3 times a week. He says it's always a struggle to drive passengers to their destination safely.
We come across a lot of potholes and huge speed ramps on the road when driving. These are the major causes of accidents.
Amo says speed ramps already fixed on roads are poorly constructed. In 2018, over 2,300 people were killed in road accidents, many of them involving commercial vehicles. The government says it's working to ensure speed limit devices are installed in all commercial vehicles this year to reduce fatalities.
6 people die in road accidents in Ghana every day. That's according to motor transport officials, who say many of these accidents are linked to speeding and bad roads. And while the government is planning to enforce speed limits, drivers here say they want the roads fixed first.
We need to look at it holistically, that if that thing has been introduced, what education are they going through? You've given me a speed limit, but along the line, there are some hindrances that reduce my speed limit to the number of speed limits you have given to me. Something like maybe there's a pothole on the way, the road now is not good.
Some public safety experts agree vehicles must have speed limit devices installed, but say that is not enough to reduce road accidents.
Considering the urgency, the situation that we find ourselves in today, if I were a policymaker, I'm just going to take off the ground and start implementing continuous driver education, make it a strict requirement for renewal of both operator license and driving license.
But Francis Amo worries even that won't be enough. He believes fatalities will continue until Ghana's road network is improved. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Meanwhile, the Arab Maghreb Union has hosted a seminar in the Tunisian capital of Tunis to present the Trans-Maghreb railway project. Now, the strategic venture is worth about $1.7 billion and will link Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia. It is aimed at promoting trade exchanges between the 3 Maghreb central countries and to ensure free movement of goods and services. CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with more.
The Arab Maghreb League announced the completion of the feasibility study of the Trans-Maghreb Rail project linking Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia.
The decision was made in 2014, but the project faltered until 2016. The study began and intensified in the past 2 years. Now we've reached the final phase of the study, which is the promotion of the Trans-Maghreb Railway.
The ambitious project is worth $1.7 billion. It will be funded by the African Development Bank.
The railway project aims to revamp rail transport in the Maghreb region. The construction of the Trans-Maghreb high-speed rail network is a regional project that aims to connect the main cities of the Maghreb countries, namely Casablanca, Algiers, Tunis and Tripoli.
China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation that built Tazara Railway, linking Tanzania and Zambia is the main partner in this new Maghrebian project.
We want to find more good jobs, and we just want to cooperate with the local companies to boost the economic development.
The Tunisian section of the Trans-Maghreb high-speed line will have a total length of 840 kilometers. The project will later be extended to Libya and Mauritania. According to the Arab Maghreb Union, the new railway will be 2,350 kilometers long. This gigantic project, initiated in the 1990s, is aimed at promoting trade exchanges between the three Maghreb central countries and ensuring free movement of goods and services. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Chinese tech giant Huawei has signaled its intentions to drive advanced technology deeper into the East African market. The company is partnering with Reddington, one of Africa's leading distributors of technology, both in Africa and the Middle East. Well, CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa reports on their strategy.
Hundreds assembled at a hotel in Nairobi for the annual Huawei Partner Summit. These distributor partners are part of Chinese technology firm Huawei's efforts to avail its products to a wide market, which includes consumers, retailers, and small and medium enterprises. In 2018, Huawei Enterprise signed a distribution agreement with Reddington in Kenya. With over 3,000 distributors spread across Africa, Reddington is working to spread Huawei's advanced information technology products across the region. This is geared towards accelerating ICT development in East Africa.
During this cooperation, I think our local partner helped us to better understand what's the real requirements from the end users. And also, we continually to transfer the technology to the Kenya partners. So we invite a lot of partners, we join together to exchange the idea, and also we share what's the challenge from each other.
Through the forum, the partners are seeking to amplify their intention to drive the rise of advanced technology in the region. This summit comes at a time when companies across the globe are beginning to feel the effects of what is widely regarded as the fourth industrial revolution, with companies looking to ICT for solutions to everyday problems. In Kenya, the government has undertaken an ambitious development agenda, prioritizing affordable healthcare, housing, food security and manufacturing. Partners are keen to identify advanced ICT solutions to support this agenda.
We will see more inroads into private sector in technology in places like banks, telcos, government sector and other large corporates. And we will see them in other areas as well. I see, looking, for example, we do healthcare, so we see IoT being a new play, as well as telemedicine. Huawei has a number of large solutions, for example, smart cities, and we will see ourselves working with them to develop and partner in developing and implementing these large projects.
Many of you know that we are the leading
Huawei also plans to open more data centers in Kenya as part of a broader expansion of its cloud services on the continent. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break. Coming up. Boeing unveils a software update for its 737 MAX jets after 2 deadly crashes in less than 5 months. And the UK government plans a new vote on Brexit, but it's not clear if it will get full backing.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
with a dedicated and diverse team of anchors. CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Careem in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okonronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Now let's recap today's headlines. At least 18 people have been killed and several others injured after a car bomb exploded on a busy street in Somalia's capital. The explosion took place in an area with many businesses and travelers. No one has immediately claimed responsibility for the bombing. However, Mogadishu is regularly targeted by Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Shabaab. Mozambique aid organizations are looking to prevent the spread of waterborne diseases after the deadly cyclone Idai. The World Health Organization announced 900,000 doses of oral cholera vaccines. This comes after 5 cases of cholera were confirmed in the affected region. And a small tanker that was hijacked by migrants off Libya has docked in Malta's port of Valletta after Maltese special forces took control of the vessel. Well, the cargo ship had picked up about 108 migrants stranded at sea, some of whom then hijacked the vessel when it became clear that it planned to take them back to Libya. Maltese police arrested 4 men and the remainder of the migrants were disembarked and boarded onto buses. And a South Sudanese lawmaker and 2 security personnel have been killed following an attack in the northeastern state of Latjor. The White Army militia is believed to have carried out the attack, which also left 2 others wounded. Now, the country has been grappling with civil war since 2013, despite President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar signing an accord last September. The prolonged civil war has left about 400,000 people dead. It has also crippled oil production and forced millions to flee the country. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Meanwhile, U.S. aircraft manufacturer Boeing has announced a software update designed to fix bugs in the flight control system of its troubled 737 MAX jets. The update comes after 2 deadly crashes involving Boeing 737 MAX aircraft in less than 5 months. While Boeing says it has updated the plane's flight control system to provide additional layers of protection, Boeing said the improved software has been put through hundreds of hours of analysis, laboratory testing and verification in a simulator and 2 test flights. Meanwhile, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration says it will need thousands of additional employees if it assumes responsibility for all aircraft certifications. Officials from the regulators have been questioned by lawmakers over the approval process in the wake of 2 deadly crashes involving Boeing's best-selling airliner the 737 MAX. We'll hear CGTN's Giles Gibson with more from Washington.
During this hearing up here on Capitol Hill, the acting FAA administrator, Dan Elwell, said that if his agency was to regulate the entire aviation industry here in the United States, instead of delegating some of those tasks to Boeing and other plane manufacturers, they would need 10,000 extra employees and $1.8 billion of extra funding. The regulators during that hearing also faced a lot of questions about MCAS. It's an automatic flight control system which investigators are looking into in terms of finding out the cause of the Lion Air crash that we saw off the coast of Indonesia last year, as well as the more recent Ethiopian Airlines crash. Meanwhile, while this hearing was going on in Washington, D.C., on the other side of the country in Washington State, Boeing hosted around 200 pilots, airline executives and regulators, and really released a preview of several issues that they are going to try and fix. A software fix, cockpit alerts and pilot training. They're due to send that update to the FAA by the end of the week and try and get their planes, these 737 MAX jets, back up into the skies and try and rebuild their reputation amongst passengers. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
Well, moving on to Brexit now, British Prime Minister Theresa May is expected to make a last-ditch attempt to push through her Brexit deal on Friday. Now, May has offered to resign if Parliament backs her withdrawal deal. She signalled the end to her premiership on a dramatic night in the Commons, where MPs failed to unite around any Brexit scenario during Wednesday's indicative votes. However, the debate this round will not amount to a third attempt to pass a meaningful vote on the EU withdrawal package. Passing the withdrawal agreement alone will allow the UK to qualify for an extension in Brexit talks to 22 May under the terms set down by the European Council last week.
The UK Parliament, one of the world's oldest representative institutions, and Brexit testing it to the edge of destruction.
It was UK Prime Minister Theresa May's failure to win support for her Brexit deal with the European Union that led to members of Parliament rising up and taking power to find their own acceptable alternatives.
Speculation now that sacrificing her job might get May's twice-defeated deal across the line. Parliamentary Speaker John Bercow, however, said he'd attempt to stop it returning a third time unless it's fundamentally changed.
In order that there should be no misunderstanding, I wish to make clear that I do expect the government to meet the test of change.
Parliament's Brexit hijack, as some describe it, follows a weekend in which an estimated 1 million marchers called for the UK to remain in the European Union, and a petition on Parliament's website topped 6 million names. In Brussels, it prompted a call for a long delay to Brexit, allowing the UK to rethink its strategy.
You cannot betray the 6 million people who signed the petition to revoke Article 50, the 1 million people who marched for a people's vote, or the increasing majority of people who want to remain in the European Union.
On Monday, MPs will possibly be back here again, poring over favoured Brexit alternatives.
There's no guarantee that it'll all end happily, and every possibility that members of Parliament will find themselves agreeing about nothing. There's even a possibility of Theresa May's plan making a return. In short, the campaign over Brexit continues amid rising diplomatic and political damage. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
Well, let's shift focus now. South Korea's largest auto show gets underway this week. The 2019 Seoul Motor Show features all of the latest vehicles from major car brands across the globe. But as cars become more high-tech, manufacturers are now using other means to connect with their buyers. Well, Shane Ham tells us more.
The bright lights, shiny wax polish, and fanfare are back. The 2019 Seoul Motor Show features all the latest the automotive world has to offer. From the latest concept cars to hardcore motorheads, it's all you can expect from a world-class motor show.
진열된 상품을 그저 바라보는
Our exhibit isn't like a department store where visitors simply look at displayed items. Rather, visitors can personally experience a car's performance and relate to the value our brand strives for.
Nearly 24 local and foreign automakers are exhibiting at this year's event. And it's not just traditional gasoline-fueled vehicles.
We have incorporated new mobility exhibits, including telecommunications and energy firms. And in addition to cars, we are exhibiting drones, small-sized electric vehicles, and motorcycles.
Making its debut here in Seoul is U.S. electric car maker Tesla and its latest Model 3 sedan. But noticeably absent from this year's event are other global brand names like Audi, Volkswagen, and Ford. Part of the reason for that could be that the Seoul show happens on a busy calendar between events in Geneva and Shanghai, but it's also a reflection of the fast-changing automotive landscape. Attendance figures at motor shows worldwide have been declining since the turn of the century. The industry is shifting more toward connected, autonomous cars. And exhibitors are focusing more on events like the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas and the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Companies are also using other promotional methods like standalone pop-up events.
We understand that it's important to transform into a more future-oriented motor show. We need to focus more on attracting companies that combine parts, materials, new energies, and new IT and apply it to automobiles.
The traditional auto show won't be going anywhere soon. There is still an opportunity for consumers to experience their favorite brands. But gone are the days when world premieres and scantily clad models are the main attraction. Shane Ham, CGTN, Goyang, South Korea.
And moving on now, global iron ore prices are expected to push higher this year. Analysts are now questioning mining giant Vale about when the supply will normalize following January's deadly dam collapse in Brazil. Meanwhile, the world's fourth largest iron ore miner, FMG, sees a continuing strong demand in China. While CGTN's Cheng Lei caught up with the firm's CEO, Elizabeth Gaines. Take a look.
After forecast beating first half earnings, what are your expectations for FMG and for the iron ore market in 2019, given this China slowdown and also uncertainties from Vale's accident?
From our perspective, the outlook for the Chinese market actually is still very strong. And then in the context of the tragedy at Vale, I mean, that was a terrible, terrible event. I don't think we yet have clarity in terms of the impact on supply, particularly around the time frame and over and when it might actually start to demonstrate itself in the market. There are views that it'll be in the range of 30 to 70 million tonnes of disruption of supply from Vale. But then I've seen recent reports that talk about the impact on other miners who operate in the same region, and that might extend to 90 million tonnes disruption. So that's quite a significant impact on the market. And I think that's why we're seeing the iron ore price remain at elevated levels. So currently, I think the settings are that we'll start to see that impact sort of manifest itself in the next sort of 3 to 6 months, and then we'll get a better understanding of the extent of the disruption and what it might mean over what time frame.
You mentioned China demand holding up, but auto sales have weakened, and also with uncertainty of China-US trade hanging over people's heads. Is that becoming a bigger variable in the commodity markets?
I think the US trade discussions certainly have an impact on the broader sector and sentiment, but certainly what we've seen actually with steel production is predominantly steel production, or as steel is consumed domestically. So China has not been a big exporter of steel to the US, maybe 1% of steel production. So from our perspective, the impact of these ongoing trade discussions, we don't actually see that having a major impact on steel production. Certainly I think on some of the flat products there has been a bit of a slowdown on those automobile sales, but we tend to focus more on the HRC market, and we're certainly seeing that rebar is still actually very, very strong.
And what about diversifying your markets, so that you're not so overly reliant on China and also not so overly reliant on iron ore?
Well, it's twofold. When it comes to iron ore, we certainly see China as being the dominant market in terms of the import of seaborne iron ore for some time to come. We are in a very strong position in terms of our proximity to what will be a high growth region more broadly. So we are looking at other opportunities. We've seen steel mills being built in Vietnam and Indonesia, and we're actually already supplying to some of those steel mills as well. So over the long term, we see growth coming out of the broader region. When it comes to diversification of commodities, we are interested in diversification. We, like many mining companies, are really focused on that inevitable growth in electric vehicles, which will drive demand for battery materials. So we're looking at that from an exploration perspective, and we've got exploration targets in Ecuador and in Argentina, and those are predominantly focused on copper gold, so that's where we're putting our exploration investment. We're investing $100 million this year in exploration. Most of that will be on our iron ore tenements in the Pilbara. We are the biggest tenement holder in the Pilbara, but we are looking at those opportunities for diversification, both in Australia but also overseas.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at how some key commodities performed today. Now, we did see oil prices sliding down today, extending losses into a second consecutive session, and that's following a surprise rise in U.S. crude inventories. We've seen inventories in the U.S. rise last week by about 2.8 million barrels. Meanwhile, low international coffee prices are hitting farmers globally quite hard. We've seen coffee futures near a 13-year bottom, far below the cost of production in most countries. Now, futures have been weighed down by excess supplies, particularly coming from Brazil. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still to come. Siltation threatens fishermen's livelihoods in Nigeria.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now, where traditional fishermen living along Lake Geria say fish stocks in the region are now getting depleted, threatening their livelihoods as the lake's waters recede. Well, environmentalists say siltation polluting the river is caused by human encroachment and dumping of waste in the lake. Here's CGTN's Asta Tall with more.
Hundreds living in Demir, a village in Nigeria's Yola city, are dependent on Lake Geria for fish. For some, this is the only source of income they know. 25-year-old Gambo Mahmoud is among those whose trade is under threat.
We're just managing now. We come to the river every day and fish. We sell the little fish we're able to catch and use the money to buy food for our families and buy soup for our children. It is also through this that we buy clothes for our family, mostly during Salah celebrations. Sometimes we make sure our families are satisfied even if we don't buy anything for ourselves.
For the locals, fishing not only generates income, but also provides employment and food for the community. However, with a change in dynamics, business for them is no longer attractive.
We will keep doing our best, but if we get a better job, we will definitely change profession. The truth is, even if we don't change our business, our children will not join us in this business because they are in school.
There is no fish now like before. The little we have is costly and there are just a few customers. Before now, we used to sell our fish and go home before 6 p.m. But now we stay till around 9 p.m. because there is no money and customers are not patronizing us like they used to. We are just managing the business because we don't want to be idle, but we are suffering.
Local authorities say trade and transport have also been affected as boats no longer have access to the waters.
So far, nothing has been done yet. But the major solution to that problem is dredging. I know dredging will require a lot of money to carry out. So we don't know, but there is a need for dredging in order to create more avenue for water, for the river to contain more water, so that we have more water for the irrigation activities that we carry out.
At least 7 million people rely on fish farming across West and Central Africa. Mahmoud's income has since reduced from $550 a month to barely $200. With the current situation, he now combines fishing with farming maize and rice in the hopes that a lasting solution will be found soon so he can return to fishing full-time. Astatal, CGTN.
Now, Nigeria has always been known as a soccer-loving country, but when polo season comes to Lagos, fashion and design are amongst the top highlights besides the game. Nothing but glitz and glam grace the 300-year-old sport, with the who's who's in Nigeria in attendance. CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
When polo comes to Lagos, champagne and vibrant fashion mark the sport of kings. While most Nigerians will not trade their love of soccer, the country still hosts the biggest polo tournament in West Africa. The trophies are fiercely competed for in the event, with a show of glitz and glamour for the country's upper class.
Polo has shifted from just the sport to a fashion statement. For me, it's something fun, it's something playful, something whimsical.